Tonight we're going to talk about staying sane in the midst of stress. I imagine that this pertains to just about everyone in the room at one point or another. It happens to be a question that I've been fascinated with just about all my life. As a child, I was interested in the stories of heroes, as many of us are. And as years went on, I found myself constantly going back to the question, how do people stay sane in the midst of stress? If you're very fortunate, you find a question that generates a lifetime of work for you. I have that question. This is it. So tonight I'm going to talk about really I'm going to have two different parts to the talk. The first is understanding what stress is, and talking about the language of coping and what is good coping. This is the more sort of academic part of the talk, but it provides a common vocabulary for us all to work with. And then the second part, I'm going to talk about positive emotions and their role in stress and coping in positive emotion. And that will be a little bit more intriguing, I think. But I think we need part one in order to do part two. So the first question is defining stress. I would imagine that if I asked each of you in this room to define stress, you would each have some kind of definition. And I'm not sure how many different ones there would be, but there would be a number. But one of the most common ways is to define stress as a physiological response. This was actually done originally by Walter Cannon in the 1930s, and it continues to be a very important way to think of stress as an autonomic nervous system fight or flight response. Where the cortisol shoots up, heart rate increases, attention narrows, and the body is fully mobilized. Another way of talking about stress is something that happens to you. And the major approach that this has been used for is life events. And I think many of you have seen life events measures, and I have here the items from the original Life Events Checklist, which was designed in 1967 by Holmes and Ray. And death of a spouse was given the highest rating. And divorce, and don't you love this one, wife begins or stops work. This shows you how questionnaires can become dated. Foreclosure of a mortgage or loan, and vacation. Each of these is given a different number of rating points, and the more points you have, the more at risk you're supposed to be for illness. Now, when people think about stress, how many people think about it as something that happens to them, an event or a situation that happens to you? Yeah, about a third of the room. All right. The problem, well, I'll go into this a little bit later. Another way of thinking about stress is as an imbalance when demands exceed resources. And this is very often taken from the engineering metaphor, as when a bridge collapses. It's also taken when you have a little bit more work to do than you can possibly manage, as in the image of the person at the desk. This imbalance idea, demands versus resources, it's used a lot in the work literature, in the occupational stress literature. How many people, when you think of stress, think of it this way? Yeah, a lot. Okay. Well, you're all right. It's all these things. But there's something missing. What's missing is the characteristics of the person that make a difference in how stressful a situation may be. These include priorities and goals, values, beliefs, developmental history, psychological, physical, and social resources for coping. And let me just give you an example of this. Giving a public talk is sometimes used by social psychologists as a stressor because it's universally considered a very stressful experience. But some people do feel that is very stressful. Others, however, think this is a great idea. What makes the difference is the personal history, or the values, or the goals, or the person's resources. All of these characteristics of the person make the difference. That's why, for example, you can't judge even a divorce as 100 or 90 on the Holmes and Ray rating scale, because for one member of the couple it may be 100, and for another it might be a 65, depending upon who's initiating the divorce and what's to be lost and what's to be gained. The person matters. This was taken into account in a cognitive theory of stress. And this is where I'll just give you a little bit of theory. The key concepts here is that stress is contextual. It involves the person in a particular environment or situation. So you can never think of stress without thinking of a context for it, of what's happening and what's going on. Stress is a dynamic process. It isn't something that just happens and it's over. It unfolds over time. And the process is influenced by these two phenomena. One is cognitive appraisal, which I'm going to tell you about, and the other is coping. And when you have this vocabulary, you will have a definition of stress that takes the person into account. A situation is stressful when you appraise it as a harm or challenge, it is personally meaningful, it matters to you, and it taxes or exceeds your resources for coping. So appraisal is a judgmental, evaluative process that we are always engaging in. When you are out in the world and doing things, you're constantly looking around without even being aware of it. Am I okay? Am I in danger? Is everything all right? Do I need to be alert? This appraisal process is an unconscious process that we engage in just routinely. So here's another example of a cognitive appraisal, that you have the balance of demands and resources. And the first thing you ask is, what's happening? Am I okay? And what can I do? These are the questions. And it will be stressful if something happens that says I am not okay, and that it's hard for me to do something about it, and it matters. Without the mattering, it won't be stressful. And this is very important. The mattering is what makes the difference in the stress, in stress. Does this matter to me? If it doesn't matter, it will be much less stressful than if it does matter.